I used to think I knew what rock bottom felt like. I'd had moments where I thought, okay, this is it. Things can't get worse than this. Lost a job I actually liked, watched my savings drain away, had that moment where you're checking your bank account 3 times a day, like the number might magically change. And each time I thought I'd hit the floor, I told myself, at least it can't go down from here. But there's this anime character, this guy who spends literally years of his life in the worst situations imaginable, and he taught me something I really didn't want to learn. There is no bottom. You can always fall further. And somehow, that's actually the most hopeful thing I've ever heard.
Kaiji is not the kind of protagonist you usually see in anime. He's not talented, he's not special, he's not even particularly smart most of the time. When we first meet him, he's a deadbeat in his 20s living in a rundown apartment, no job, spending his days doing absolutely nothing productive. He's the kind of guy you'd see and think, yeah, that's on him, he made his choices. And you'd be right, except the series doesn't let you sit comfortably with that judgment because it shows you exactly how someone ends up there and how impossible it becomes to climb back out.
The story kicks off when a loan shark shows up at Kaiji's door. Turns out he co-signed a loan for a friend who disappeared, and now Kaiji's on the hook for millions of yen he doesn't have. Not thousands, millions. The kind of debt that doesn't just go away. And the loan shark offers him a deal. Come on a gambling cruise, win enough money, clear the debt, everyone goes home happy. Of course it's a trap. Of course the games are rigged. But when you're that desperate, when the alternative is having your life destroyed anyway, you take the chance. I remember watching this opening and feeling that knot in my stomach because I recognized that math, that horrible calculation where every option is bad, so you pick the one that at least gives you a sliver of hope. Maybe some of you have been there too, maybe with different specifics, but that feeling of being trapped by circumstances that spiraled out of control faster than you could react, that's where Kaiji lives. The cruise arc is brutal. Kaiji manages to win some games through a combination of luck and reading people, but he also gets betrayed multiple times by people he trusted, by people he helped, by people who seemed like friends right up until the moment they stabbed him in the back. And each betrayal pushes him further down. He ends up losing everything he'd won, ends up in even more debt, and gets sent to an underground forced labor camp to work it off. This is where the series really digs into what rock bottom actually means. The underground facility is designed to break people. You work back-breaking manual labor for barely any pay, and everything costs money. Your food, your bed, even the air you breathe in your tiny capsule room. The math is set up so you can never earn enough to escape. You can work for years and still end up deeper in debt than when you started. It's a system designed to trap people permanently, and Kaiji realizes this pretty quickly after arriving.
There's this moment early in his time there where it just hits him, like really hits him, that he might be there for the rest of his life. He's watching other prisoners who've been there for years, shuffling through their days like ghosts, and he can see his future in them. And the narrator, this omniscient voice that's basically Kaiji's own anxious thoughts externalized, just lays it out. You thought you'd hit bottom before? You thought losing your apartment was bad? You thought being in debt was the worst it could get? Look at where you are now, and it can still get worse. I had to pause the episode the first time I watched this because it was hitting too close to something I'd been trying not to think about. I'd had this idea in my head that once you hit a certain level of bad, that's it. You've hit the floor and the only way is up. But that's not how it works, is it? You can lose your job and think that's the bottom, then lose your apartment. You can lose your apartment and think that's the bottom, then lose your car. You can keep falling through floors you didn't even know existed. And the really terrifying thing is there's no guaranteed stopping point, no cosmic safety net that catches you and says, okay, you've suffered enough, here's your turnaround moment. But here's where Kaiji does something that completely changed how I think about this. He doesn't get a magical breakthrough moment. He doesn't have some realization that suddenly makes everything better. What he does is so much smaller and so much harder. He starts looking for tiny cracks in the system. He watches the guards, he observes the other prisoners, he starts figuring out the informal economy of the place. And he begins to form alliances, even after being betrayed so many times, even knowing that trusting people is what got him into this mess in the first place.
There's this arc where he and some other prisoners figure out a way to gamble with each other using a tissue box lottery that the facility allows. It's supposed to be harmless, a little entertainment for the prisoners, but Kaiji and his group realize they can pool their money and work together to beat it. And they do. They spend months planning, calculating probabilities, testing theories. They risk everything they have on this one shot at winning enough to buy their freedom. And they lose. Not all of it, but enough that they're back to square one, months of work gone. Some of the guys completely break down. One of them literally gives up, just stops trying, accepts that he'll die there. And you watch Kaiji process this. Watch him go through that moment of what's the point? Why keep trying when the system is designed to break you? When every time you get close to winning, something goes wrong.
The thing that stuck with me, the thing I kept coming back to when I was going through my own rough patch, is that Kaiji doesn't have some inspiring speech about never giving up. He doesn't suddenly become confident and determined. What he does is much more realistic and honestly, much more helpful. He just decides that doing nothing is worse than trying and failing. Not because he believes he'll definitely succeed, not because he's optimistic about his chances, but because sitting still and accepting defeat makes him feel worse than getting back up and trying again, even if he fails again. It's not about motivation or inspiration or believing in yourself. It's about the basic fact that trying feels less awful than not trying, even when the odds are terrible. And I know that sounds kind of depressing, but when you're actually in that place, when you're at what feels like rock bottom, it's way more useful than someone telling you to stay positive or that everything happens for a reason.
Kaiji does eventually escape the underground. I'm not going to spoil exactly how, but it's not because he's special or because he suddenly got lucky. It's because he kept looking for opportunities, kept forming alliances, kept trying things even when they didn't work. And the crucial thing is that getting out of the underground doesn't solve all his problems. He's still in debt. He still has people trying to exploit him. He still makes mistakes and trusts the wrong people and ends up in new, terrible situations. And that's actually the real lesson, the thing that changed how I see my own struggles. Rock bottom isn't a place you reach and then climb out of once and you're done. It's more like there are infinite basements and you can always fall through to a lower one, but you can also always find a way to climb back up a level. The goal isn't to reach solid ground and never fall again. The goal is to get better at recognizing when you're falling and catching yourself sooner, to build the skills and knowledge that make the next climb a little easier. When I lost that job, I spent weeks just kind of frozen, terrified of making the wrong move and ending up somewhere worse. And I did end up somewhere worse for a while, but instead of seeing that as proof that I should have stayed frozen, I started seeing it like Kaiji does. Okay, this is a lower floor than I was on before. That sucks, but there's still a ladder somewhere, and standing still definitely isn't going to help me find it. Maybe the next thing I try won't work either, but at least I'll learn what doesn't work, and that's information I can use.
I'm not going to pretend this is some magic solution that makes everything better. Kaiji is still struggling by the end of the series. I'm still dealing with my own stuff. But there's something weirdly comforting about accepting that there's no actual bottom, because it means there's also no ceiling on how many times you can try again. You can fail, fall further, fail again, and as long as you're still conscious and capable of making decisions, you can look for the next crack in the system, the next small opportunity, the next tiny step up. The floors keep going down, but the ladders keep being there too. And sometimes just knowing that, just remembering that Kaiji kept finding ways to climb even from the deepest holes, that's enough to get me to take the next step instead of staying frozen. Thanks for watching. If this resonated with you at all, or if you've got your own thoughts on Kaiji or hitting rock bottom, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you enjoyed this, subscribing would help me keep making videos like this. Either way, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.